All right, so I'm gonna break my promise. I said 15 minutes, I'm gonna go 5 extra minutes. So at the 20, someone stop me if I'm still going, because I want to talk about subqueries. Subqueries, sometimes called inner queries, sometimes, oh, what have I heard it before? There's something else that people sometimes call it, but subqueries pretty much know more or less, basically, they're kind of queries within queries. So note that, for example, I have a select statement here. I'm using the comma statement here. I actually, for the record, I write my SQL queries all like this. Most people probably don't, but I think it just makes it nice and easy to like comment things out. But I'm selecting my stuff right here, and note that I'm using explicitly which table I'm doing, stuff like that. So I'm doing like leaders.employee number, and then actually calling alias. So I'm being trying to explicit as possible. And so I have this query right here. Like, cool, awesome, right? But let's say it's like, okay, this is basically saying, okay, I'm getting all the leaders such that the employee numbers and leaders basically, so note that I'm having employees here as leaders. It's just the things that are the people, the employees are reporting to. Does that make sense? So it's the same table, but I'm joining it together, because if we saw back in that diagram way up here, you can see employees in reports to actually points to itself, right? Because it's the same ID. So this is kind of useful. It's like, okay, now I essentially have a new table, essentially, which are all the leaders, right? And I have the leader last name and then who's their subordinate. So that's pretty useful, right? At least I think it's pretty useful. And you can see, for example, some people have like this guy right here, Murphy, or I guess girl, sorry. But Murphy has 2 leaders, you know, basically she's subordinate to 2 different leaders. You might see, there might be some cases where maybe there's like 1 leader who is for multiple people. So you could do a whole bunch of really cool things with here, right? So the thing is, like, well, what if I wanted to use this table now? Like, it's not really a real table. Like, it would be nice to be able to use this. This is where subqueries kind of goes through. I can essentially say, okay, I want to define this leaders table, right? This whole leaders table, and kind of use this as its own table. So this is what a subquery does. So you can see here, pretend I do have this leaders table that exists, right? I created it, but pretend it already exists. I can do select leaders.last name, leaders.subordinates, right? And you can say, okay, pretend I have a leaders table, right? Leaders, and then join it on my customers. So now I can actually see which customer sales rep employee number is in for the leader team. So now I can kind of pull that information out. So this allows me extra functionality. So right here, note that this is an F string, so I'm kind of cheating, so I don't have to copy and paste. But I could have copy and paste this whole thing, this whole query in here, and that's certainly what you'll see in SQL. But you can now basically copy this whole thing in here, and you can actually treat that essentially as a query within a query. So it allows me to kind of like do some extra functionality. So if I do this now, you can actually see the last name as well as the subordinate last name. And then I think I just put something here just because I wanted to throw something on in the query real quick. But if you look at this, if I go ahead and print out, what is this? Combined query. You can see here, no, it's not very pretty, but let's see if I do print. There we go. There you go. You can see here, this is actually what is being sent over. It basically is a query within a query. So this is like my original query, is my subquery, right? Executes this stuff and then treats this as a full table. Because remember, all SQL results are just tables. So this is why you can kind of treat this. And you can actually have subqueries within subqueries within subqueries. In fact, like the deepest I've ever gone with subqueries is probably like maybe 6 subqueries deep, like where you're calling within there. But more or less you kind of copy and paste, right? Or like, you know, you have a set up, some people actually have sets of queries that they use very commonly, and they'll just basically use this in different files and call those files over. I've known a lot of people who like, you know, will do that kind of thing because it's a lot easier if they're using the same database over time or all the time. I know there is a limit technically for subqueries, but I think it's like 256. I think that's the limit for most part. And I think it was even raised for certain servers. So in practice, I don't think you have to worry too much about having too many subqueries within subqueries. But anyway, it can be very, very useful. Any questions on this guy? This is probably like the most complex thing that we've seen so far for SQL. Okay, cool. And I think, does everyone understand like how this kind of query that's highlighted right now, that basically will return a table, which is why we can kind of act like as if we're joining on a table? Awesome, cool. One thing I'll kind of show is that we could also have done something else with CTE, which is common table expressions. I don't know why it's E, expressions. Something called common table expressions. And so you can also write subqueries like this, like literally just type out this exact thing, but you also could write it as this with leaders as, and then doing this part. And this basically allows you to treat it as if you have a leaders table. So you can see here, I have leaders. And basically this with part right here is executed as if it's a subquery. So it effectively does the same thing, but it can be a little bit neater, especially if you have many, many subqueries within itself. Okay. And you can see it returns the same thing. And if I print out the combined subquery here, you can see this is the with. And then this is that subquery right here, or this is the query, the main query right here. All right. Cool. I don't think the curriculum shows about with, but it's pretty useful. Any questions? Sound pretty good? Okay. Thumbs up if it's sounding good. Sideways, you're like, I don't know. Thumbs down, you're like, I don't know what's going on. Okay, all right. I see more or less this, which I think is a good sign. Generally, I say that this sideways usually means like this sideways, but I'll take it. Okay. And again, more practice will be helpful. All right, cool. So let's see here. So that's kind of all I want to talk about SQL for right now. We'll probably talk about more SQL in the future. But now we're going to kind of move on to something else. So let me go ahead and pull up my next thing.